What would you do if a dog followed you home? Watch this. I nearly stepped on the dog before I even knew it was there. It was pitch black outside, and the December wind was screaming around me, buffeting my coat as I struggled to unlock my front door. A strange whimper stopped me in my tracks. When I turned, I saw two luminous eyes staring right at me from the shadows. It was so shocking that, for a second, I forgot how to breathe. My heart galloped, adrenaline spiking. For an instant, I imagined all kinds of worst-case scenarios, until I realized I was just looking at a dog, its muddy fur soaked through by the driving rain, trembling with a mix of cold and what seemed like sheer terror. A million thoughts collided in my mind. Where did it come from? Why was it alone so late at night? And then the question that still haunts me to this day: what would I do if a dog followed me home? In fact, that's exactly what was happening. The moment I stepped toward it, the dog shrank back as if it expected a blow. My heart twisted with guilt. There was fear in those eyes, a fear that whispered of cruelty it must have endured. Then it looked at me again, and there was something else. Hope. The dog's gaze locked onto mine, and I could almost hear the unspoken plea: "Don't leave me here." I'd never owned a dog. I didn't even particularly consider myself a dog person. But there I was, fumbling with my keys, weighed down by groceries, while this frightened creature quivered at the threshold. My house wasn't big. My life felt complicated enough. Yet the dog's quiet whimper tugged at me more fiercely than any storm ever could. I'm not proud to admit that part of me wanted to shut the door and pretend I hadn't noticed. But something about that moment, the rawness of it, the unexpected arrival, made it impossible to turn away. Without thinking it through, I pushed my door open wide and whispered, "Come inside." It didn't move at first. The dog stared at the open doorway as if it were a portal to another dimension, uncertain if crossing over was safe. Rain pelted the pavement behind it. The wind howled again, rattling the fences in my yard. Then, like a timid child, the dog crept forward, one trembling paw at a time. The instant it was inside, I closed the door against the storm, my heart beating so fast that it felt like it might burst. I crouched down, the hallway light casting our shadows onto the wall. The dog was drenched, fur caked in mud, leaving a trail of dirty paw prints on the floor. Up close, I could see it was painfully thin, its ribs faintly visible under a swirl of wet fur. Its ears were low, tail tucked so tight between its legs it was almost invisible. Gently, I reached out. The dog flinched, eyes wide. My stomach churned at the thought of what it must have endured to react with such dread. But I didn't pull away. I let my hand hover near its head for a second, allowing it to decide if contact was safe. Slowly, warily, the dog leaned forward. It sniffed my fingertips, and as if satisfied I wasn't there to hurt it, it nudged my palm with its wet nose. Electricity seemed to spark between us, igniting a swell of emotion so unexpected that tears stung my eyes. The dog's muzzle was warm, contrasting with the cold of its soaked fur, and I felt a delicate trust being formed in that moment. It was like a fragile thread, easy to break but filled with possibility. So I quietly said, "It's okay," and lightly scratched behind its ear. The dog blinked and stepped closer, settling next to me. There, in the warm glow of the hallway, I promised myself I'd at least take care of the basics. See if it was hurt, clean it up, feed it, and figure out what to do next. Because while my mind was spinning with responsibilities, I had to be up early for work, I had errands, I had financial worries. The situation at hand was urgent. This poor, shivering creature was in dire need of help right now. The rest, I told myself, could wait. I had no idea then that this decision, this one small act of compassion, would unravel into one of the most shocking, life-altering experiences I could imagine. Carefully, I led the dog into my tiny living room, flicked on a lamp, and went to get some towels from the linen closet. My living room wasn't exactly grand. A threadbare couch, a coffee table buried under newspapers and old receipts, a second-hand lamp with a chipped shade. But it was the first time I'd ever felt it had any real purpose. As I returned with the towels, I saw the dog pacing uncertainty, sniffing at the edges of the room, occasionally pausing to glance at me as though trying to gauge my intentions. When I gingerly patted the couch, inviting it up, the dog just started. Maybe it had never known such a privilege. So I settled on the floor, laying a towel across my lap, and motioned for it to come closer. Cautiously, step by step, it approached. Once it was near enough, I started to dab at the dripping fur. It stood stock still, quivering a bit, but it let me continue. The entire time my thoughts swirled. Why me? Why tonight? What if the dog is sick, or has fleas, or belongs to someone? Could I possibly keep it if no owner turned up? 100 questions, no answers, and just the two of us locked in this silent, tense, yet strangely tender scene. When I finally toweled away most of the rain, I paused to look at its face. The dog had sharp, intelligent eyes. In the lamplight, they were warm and brown, holding an unspoken story. I felt compelled to speak, even though it couldn't understand me in words. "Where did you come from?" I murmured softly. "Are you lost, or did someone hurt you?" The dog blinked slowly, leaning into my hand as I gave a gentle stroke. That gesture, so simple, nearly broke my heart. I got up to fetch some food. I had no dog food, of course, so I scrambled around for something suitable. A bit of leftover chicken, some rice, all warmed up slightly to take off the chill. The dog wolfed it down in seconds, so ravenous that it nearly swallowed everything in one gulp. I poured some water into a shallow dish, which it lapped at with desperate thirst. Each second that passed, I could almost see a layer of tension peeling away from the dog's posture, replaced by a cautious sort of gratitude. Then it let out a tiny, contented sigh, and I chuckled in spite of everything. At that moment, you could almost believe it belonged here. I considered calling animal control or a shelter right away. That was the logical step, wasn't it? But when I looked at the dog's exhaustion, saw it teetering on wobbly legs from the endless ordeal it must have faced outside, I decided it could wait until morning. I'd at least let it rest tonight. In that small, fragile bubble of quiet, it felt like the right thing to do. That's when the dog lifted its head and nudged my palm again, as though reading my thoughts, as if to say, "Thank you." And I can't fully explain how or why, but something lit inside me. A faint glow of protectiveness, maybe, or the kind of empathy I'd never quite felt before. I'm not the type to connect easily, but there in my cramped living room, with that trembling dog pressed against my knees, I sensed a bond forming that neither of us expected. I'm certain people reading this might wonder how a single dog could provoke such a profound emotional upheaval. But I promise, it was only the beginning. I settled on letting the dog sleep in a makeshift bed I created with old blankets. I placed them in a corner of the living room, away from the drafty windows. As soon as I patted the blankets, it eased onto them, curling up with a tiny whimper. I wanted to stay there and watch over it all night, but exhaustion from my day weighed heavily. I made sure the front door was locked, turned off the lights, and made my way to my bedroom, mind still swirling with conflicting thoughts. My last glimpse before turning out the living room lamp was of the dog, eyes half closed, gazing at me as though it couldn't believe its luck. And strangely, I realized how good it felt to be that source of safety for another living being. The next morning, I woke up with a jolt. The memory of the dog in my house flooded in. For a split second, I questioned if I'd dreamt it. Then I heard soft scratching at my bedroom door. My heart pounded. This was really happening. When I opened the door, there it was, sitting patiently, ears perked, tail wagging timidly against the floor. The instant it saw me, the dog's tail sped up. I don't know that I've ever had anyone or anything look so genuinely happy to see me in the morning. I knelt down, gave it a gentle pat. "Hey there," I said, not even sure what to call it. I realized I'd never checked the dog's collar. There was none. No identification, no tags, just a patch of worn fur around the neck, possibly from a collar that had been too tight or removed abruptly. My heart sank. This could mean the dog was either abandoned or astray for quite some time. But I had responsibilities, work was calling. In a mad rush, I threw on clothes, fed the dog more of the leftover chicken. I'd have to buy proper food soon if I was going to keep it, even temporarily, and hurried out the door with a promise that I'd be back by evening. A pang of guilt gnawed at me as I locked up. The dog's eyes followed me with a mixture of concern and longing. For a second, I hesitated. Maybe I should call in sick or try to find a local shelter right away. But practicality won out. I had an important meeting, rent was due soon, life was complicated. I'd handle the dog situation afterward. All day at work, I felt a knot in my stomach. Concentration was nearly impossible, as my mind jumped between spreadsheets and the memory of those pleading eyes. In quick moments between tasks, I searched on my phone for local animal shelters and rescue organizations. Most were notoriously underfunded, frequently at capacity. Dogs like the one in my house often ended up languishing in a kennel for months, if they were lucky enough not to be euthanized in overcrowded facilities. The idea of this gentle, terrified creature ending up in another frightening environment felt unbearable. By the time I arrived home, heart pounding with dread that the dog might have wrecked the place or fled in panic, I found the living room more or less as I'd left it. There was only one puddle on the floor, an accident I could hardly blame it for, and a throw pillow slightly chewed at the corner. Yet the moment I walked in, that same reluctant wag of the tail greeted me. I bent down, gave the dog a soft rub on the head, and realized I was smiling. Maybe this was crazy, but it felt good to see it again. I spent the evening calling around, searching online, trying to see if anyone had reported a missing dog matching its description. Nothing came up. I posted a quick notice on a local neighborhood group, describing the dog, keeping some details vague, so that if someone claimed it, they'd have to provide the correct identifying features. I waited, checking my phone intermittently. No responses. As the hours passed and no one stepped forward to claim the dog, I felt an odd sense of relief. Part of me realized I was growing attached at a dizzying speed. That night, instead of confining the dog to blankets in the corner, I let it lie on the couch next to me while I watched the news. The dog's head rested on my thigh, and I absently stroked its ears. A sense of contentment washed over me, the kind I rarely felt. The TV blared stories of chaos, political unrest, weather disasters, a string of burglaries nearby. Yet here in my small bubble, it was just me and a rescued creature finding solace in each other's company. For the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Over the next few days, life shifted around the dog. I picked up some basic supplies, dog food, a bowl, a cheap chew toy. I tried the chew toy out and was rewarded by the dog's wide-eyed wonder, as though it had never experienced play before. Each morning, it waited eagerly by the door as I left for work, and each evening, it rushed to greet me with a wave of excitement that never failed to warm my heart. I started taking it for short walks, noticing how it would cower if a stranger passed by too closely or if a loud noise startled it. The dog stayed glued to my side, trembling at times, but if I crouched down to reassure it, it seemed to draw courage from my presence. One afternoon, exactly a week since it had first followed me home, I decided to take a longer walk. We ventured into the quiet neighborhood park, the dog trotting diligently beside me. For the first time, it seemed to enjoy the open space, sniffing at grass and shrubs, ears perking at the distant hum of traffic. I practiced calling out for it to see if it would respond to a name. I hadn't actually named it yet. Part of me was still cautious, uncertain if I'd end up keeping it. But at the park, I felt an urge to call it something. And without thinking, the word lucky came to mind. Maybe it was but it fit. I felt lucky to have found it, and it might be lucky to have found me. I called, "Lucky, come here." And to my surprise, the dog's ears flicked. It turned its head and after the briefest hesitation, trotted right to me as though the name had resonated. My heart soared. We had a name. Those days were peppered with fleeting moments of real joy, But as with any emotional journey, there were also unforeseen shadows lurking. I began to notice that Lucky had scars. Not just emotional scars, though those were evident whenever a loud noise or sudden movement made Lucky cringe, but actual physical scars, thin lines on the hindquarters, a ragged notch on one ear. They spoke of a cruel past. The times I tried to examine them more closely, Lucky would whimper and pull away. It was the kind of reaction that broke me inside, conjuring up images of violence and neglect I desperately wanted to forget. But there was no erasing the evidence etched into Lucky's fur. One particularly rainy evening, reminiscent of the night we first met, I settled down on the couch. Lucky sprawled at my feet and scrolled through social media. A post popped up about a local dogfighting ring bust. My stomach turned. Could Lucky have been a victim of something so horrific? The pictures in the article were horrifying, all battered animals rescued in dire conditions. Furious tears blurred my vision. I couldn't bear the thought of Lucky undergoing such brutal treatment, but the possibility weighed on me, refusing to be dismissed. As days turned to weeks, Lucky's trust in me grew stronger. The dog followed me from room to room, almost never letting me out of sight, as if afraid to lose me. And with that trust came moments of playful energy, a sudden dash around the yard, a clumsy attempt at chasing squirrels, even a gentle lick on my hand as I petted Lucky goodnight. In these moments, I glimpsed the dog Lucky might have been, had the world not left so many scars. Then came the first twist I never saw coming. It was a Sunday morning, quiet except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. I was in the kitchen cooking scrambled eggs when a frantic knock pounded at the door. Lucky leapt from the couch, barking, a low, defensive growl I hadn't heard before. My heart lurched, and I dried my hands on a dish towel, crossing the living room to peek through the blinds. A man stood there, one hand cupped around his eyes, peering through the window. He looked rough around the edges, tall, gaunt, with a faded baseball cap pulled low. Something about the way he shifted from foot to foot made me uneasy. I opened the door just a crack, keeping my voice firm. "Yes." He smiled, but his eyes didn't. "Hey, I'm from around here, looking for my lost dog." He paused, glancing into my hallway. "Have you seen a brownish mutt anywhere? Might wandered by." My heart slammed against my ribs. I thought of Lucky, cowering behind me, maybe recognizable through the gap in the door. I forced a polite tone. "No, sorry, haven't seen anything like that." A partial lie because he said brownish mutt, but Lucky was more of a brindle mix with patchy fur. Still, I felt uneasy. He looked at me closely, and for a moment I saw a flicker in his gaze, like maybe he didn't believe me. Then he shrugged. "Oh yeah, my dog used to run off sometimes. Figured it might show up here. If you see one wandering around, you let me know. Goes by the name Buddy." He tried a disarming smile that made my stomach tighten. "Anyway, I posted flyers, so keep an eye out, okay?" He shoved a crumpled flyer through the door. I glanced at it. A blurry photo of a dog that vaguely resembled Lucky. Brownish coat, medium size, a generic description. My mind screamed that something was off. If Lucky was indeed his dog, wouldn't he have more details, or be more specific about the pattern of the fur, the ears, something? And what about the scars that suggested a much darker story? He left with a tip of his cap. I closed the door and found Lucky trembling, pressed against the wall. It felt like the temperature in the room had dropped. A swirl of protective rage went through me. There was no way I was handing Lucky over to a stranger who made my skin crawl. That day I resolved to take Lucky to a vet, see if there was a microchip. If there wasn't, and if no one else could prove legitimate ownership, I would find a way to keep Lucky safe. At the vet, Lucky sat shaking on the exam table. A young veterinarian with a kind smile scanned for a microchip. We waited, hearts pounding. Nothing. The vet noted the scar tissue, the dog's anxious demeanor. She gently suggested Lucky might have been used as a bait dog or faced serious abuse. My throat tightened with emotion, fighting tears as I stroked Lucky's neck, and whispered soft reassurances. The veterinarian recommended a thorough checkup, updated vaccines, and gave me advice on how to handle Lucky's anxiety. I left the clinic with a swirl of relief and heartbreak, plus a brand new determination. Lucky wasn't going anywhere unless it was to a loving home, and from the way things were going, that might just be mine. In the following weeks, life became a balancing act. On one hand, caring for Lucky felt right, filling me with purpose. On the other, there was the persistent fear that the stranger who knocked on my door might return. I noticed him sometimes, wandering the neighborhood, eyeballing properties as though looking for something. Then an unsettling event occurred. I found footprints in the damp soil beside my windows one night. Could it have been him? I couldn't be sure, but I started locking every window, double-bolting the door, always worried for Lucky's safety. Meanwhile, the bond between me and Lucky deepened. The dog's personality began to bloom with each day of consistent care. I remember one morning in particular. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and Lucky actually bounded across the living room to greet me, tail wagging so hard that his whole rear end wiggled. He gave me an enthusiastic, goofy grin, the kind of dog smile that melts your heart. I laughed aloud, kneeling to greet him. He licked my cheek, and I felt an overwhelming gratitude that I had opened my door that stormy night. But the calm was short-lived. A few days later, after a late evening walk, I returned home to find a note taped to my front door. The handwriting was scrawled, almost illegible. "I know you have my dog. If you don't give him back, I'll come get him." My stomach churned. Was it that stranger who had knocked on my door? How had he figured out about Lucky? Did someone see me walking him and mention it to the wrong person? My heart hammered with panic. What if he actually tried to force entry? Or worse? I called the police to report a threatening note, though I wasn't sure how seriously they'd take it. An officer arrived, a middle-aged woman with a kind but weary expression. She took down the details, including the name of the man who'd left the flyer, assured me she'd file a report, and told me to be cautious. When she saw Lucky peeking around the corner, she smiled sadly. "This the dog in question?" she asked, taking in Lucky's trembling. I nodded. She sighed. "I doubt that man has any rightful claim. These types of threats sometimes happen when people think they can exploit or intimidate. Keep your doors locked, and if you see him lurking, call us." Not exactly a fortress of protection, but it was something. I spent the next several nights in a state of perpetual anxiety. Every creak outside made me jump. Lucky sensed my tension, pacing around the living room as if standing guard. The fear that someone would come for Lucky ignited a protective fierceness in me I'd never known I was capable of. This wasn't just a dog. Lucky was family. The tension reached a breaking point one evening when I heard scratching outside my front door, followed by a low curse. Heart pounding, I moved quietly to the window and peered through a small gap in the blinds. It was him, the same wiry figure from before, wearing the same ragged baseball cap. He was fiddling with something at the door, maybe the lock. A wave of cold terror ripped through me. Lucky began to growl, deep and guttural, a growl I had never heard from him. Summoning my courage, I did the only thing I could think of at that moment. I flipped on every light in the house, banged my fist against the wall, and shouted, "Get away from my property!" The figure jumped back, cursing. I rushed to grab my phone and dial 911. By the time I dared to peek out again, he was gone. The police arrived later, took another statement, and warned me to be vigilant. They promised more frequent patrols in the neighborhood, but didn't offer much hope of catching him unless I had clearer evidence. I sat on the couch, Lucky pressed against my side, as shock waves rippled through my body. My mind spun. Was I putting myself in danger by keeping Lucky? Did I have the resolve to stand up to whatever this was? And then I felt Lucky's head rest on my lap, and I knew my answer. I would not abandon him. This dog depended on me, trusted me. I wasn't about to betray that trust. I decided to install a security camera, just a cheap one above my door, as a deterrent and also a source of evidence if the stranger returned. Days passed quietly after that. I continued my normal routine, albeit more wary. There was a constant sense of eyes on me when I walked Lucky, but nothing overt happened. Slowly, the fear receded to a dull throb. Then, one Friday night, the unimaginable occurred. A truly miraculous event that intertwined everything I'd been through with Lucky into a singular, shocking revelation. It began quietly enough. I was watching a movie, Lucky dozing at my feet when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore such calls, but something compelled me to answer. A hesitant, trembling voice came through the line. "Is this the person who posted about finding a stray dog a few weeks ago?" My pulse kicked up. I had shared a post on a local community page earlier on, but it was mostly overshadowed by the drama with the stranger's threats. "Yes," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's me." The voice on the other end sighed in relief. It was a woman. "I'm so sorry to bother you. My daughter lost her therapy dog about a month ago. I've been desperately searching. Someone forwarded me your post. I know it's a long shot, but I just have to know if maybe the dog is ours. Could I possibly see a photo?" A swirl of confusion, hope, and fear churned in my stomach. "Of course," I managed. "Would you like me to send some pictures? Or do you want to meet in person?" She hesitated. "Pictures first, please. I don't want to get my daughter's hopes up if it's not the same dog." After hanging up, I spent a few minutes taking pictures of Lucky, capturing the distinct patterns of fur, the shape of the face. Then I sent them to the number. Seconds ticked by like hours. At last, my phone buzzed. I opened the text. The woman had sent a single sentence. "It's him. Please let me explain." My heart hammered so loud I could practically hear it echo in my ears. Could this be the real owner? Panic flooded me. What if, after all this, Lucky belonged to someone else, someone legitimate and caring, and I would have to give him up? It felt like my heart was being torn apart at the possibility. At the same time, if Lucky had a family, a home, maybe I had to do the right thing. I texted back, asking for more details. The woman, whose name was, poured out a story that left me speechless. Her daughter was a sweet 10-year-old with severe anxiety and autism. They had a certified therapy dog named Rusty, her daughter's chosen name, who had helped navigate the world. A little over a month ago, Rusty had been stolen from their backyard. The police suspected it might be part of a larger dognapping operation. The family had searched everywhere, posted flyers, alerted local shelters, but no trace. Was certain the dog in my photos was Rusty, from the unique swirl of color on the muzzle and the small notch in his ear, a mark from an accident as a puppy. She also said there had been sightings of him in a rough part of town tied to a fence, but each lead came up empty. When I mentioned the scars, the possibility of dogfighting, she began to cry in the text messages, apologizing for failing him. She begged me to allow them to see if it was truly Rusty, to see if could be reunited with her beloved dog. Tears stung my eyes. I looked at Lucky, Rusty, and felt a nauseating tumble of emotions. I wanted to protect him, but I couldn't ignore the raw hope in his words. If Lucky truly had a child who loved him, needed him, how could I stand in the way of that reunion? Then another wave of dread. What if the child's father or someone else in the family was the one who had been abusing him? The contradictory possibilities made my head spin. We arranged a meeting for the next day at the vet's office, neutral ground, and a place where the staff knew Lucky's story. My anxiety soared through the roof that night. I tossed and turned, wrestling with my worst fears and best hopes. Lucky sensed my turmoil, sticking close to me, pressing his nose into my arm as if to say, "I'm here." At dawn, I rose early, got ready, and gently loaded Lucky into the car. At the vet's office, I waited in a small consultation room, Lucky trembling under my hand, unaware of the potential life change about to happen. After a few tense minutes, the door opened. A woman in her early 40s entered, eyes rimmed red, holding the hand of a small girl who clutched a stuffed toy. The girl's gaze flickered to Lucky, then back to me, uncertain. Softly said, "Baby, this might be Rusty." The moment the girl heard that name, she froze. Then she whispered, "Rusty," so quietly I could barely hear. Lucky's ears twitched. He cocked his head, eyes honing in on the girl. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, like a switch flipped, Lucky scrambled forward, nails scrabbling on the linoleum floor, tail wagging furiously. Let out a startled cry. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she sank to her knees, burying her face in his fur. Lucky's entire body wiggled in excitement, whining in a tone I'd never heard before, a strange combination of joy and relief. Gasped, covering her mouth as she watched her daughter and the dog reunite in what could only be described as a miracle. The entire staff in the hallway looked on in hushed awe. I realized in that moment, it was undeniably real. This dog I called Lucky was actually Rusty, a beloved therapy companion forcibly stolen from a vulnerable child who needed him. The heartbreak and hope in that reunion shattered me. Tears spilled freely down my face. Despite the emotional devastation of knowing I might lose him, I was overwhelmed by the beauty of seeing the bond they shared, the way Lucky, Rusty, kept licking his face as if to say, "I'm back. I'm here." After several emotional minutes, turned to me still in tears. "Thank you," she managed, voice trembling. "I don't know how to repay you." I swallowed hard, every nerve raw. "You don't owe me anything," I whispered, a lump in my throat making it almost impossible to speak. I just want him to be safe and happy." We sat down, and the veterinarian joined us. Explained everything in detail, how they had tried to find Rusty, the heartbreak when every lead came up empty. She assured me that his father was not in the picture, that there was no abuse in the home, and that Rusty had been her daughter's lifeline. She even showed me pictures on her phone from before he was stolen, pictures of a bright-eyed dog playing dress-up with, wearing a little vest that said "Therapy Dog." I forced a smile, though inside my heart cracked wide open. Rusty was clearly her dog, her best friend. And ironically, I realized that I had served as an unwitting guardian angel, protecting him from the worst of his stolen fate. But how to let go? I had grown to love him so fiercely, defending him from threats, nursing him through fear, forging a connection unlike any I'd known before. Was it selfish to want to keep him? Yes, it probably was. Because here was a child with a genuine need, a child whose life had unraveled when Rusty disappeared. The right thing to do was obvious, yet it felt like my heart was being ripped in two. "Would you like to visit him?" Asked gently, sensing my anguish. "You've done so much, and we'd love for you to stay in touch. You're a part of his story now." I nodded, tears threatening to choke me. "Yes, I'd like that." We made arrangements for me to visit on weekends if I wanted. They lived only a 30-minute drive away. It was a concession that eased some of my heartbreak, though not entirely. Part of me felt a deep sorrow that my chapter with Lucky, Rusty, was ending. Another part felt profound relief and gratitude that he was reuniting with someone who adored him from the start. After a final check of paperwork at the vet and ensuring the microchip was now properly in his name, I stood in the parking lot. Sat in the back seat of their car, Rusty by her side, nuzzling her stuffed toy. The look in his eyes was pure joy mixed with tears. She mouthed a silent thank you through the window, wrapped me in an unexpected hug, whispering, "You saved him. You saved us both." It was one of the most heartbreaking, beautiful moments of my life, watching them drive away, Rusty's face pressed against the window, his little hand resting on his collar. In the raw days that followed, my house felt hollow. I kept glancing at the corner of the living room, expecting to see him. The silence was heavy, but also I carried with me an inexplicable warmth, knowing that a dog who once crouched, trembling with fear at my doorstep, was now safe, cherished, fulfilling his true purpose. And somewhere along this journey I had changed too. I found a deeper empathy, an ability to connect, and a reminder that sometimes the things we love the most aren't ours to keep. As fate would have it, the saga didn't end there. About a week after Rusty returned too, and I heard a commotion outside one evening. Peeking through the curtains, I saw the same menacing figure who'd threatened me for his dog. The baseball cap pulled low, leaning on my neighbor's fence, glaring at my house. My stomach seized with fear. Did he still believe I had the dog? I stormed out the front door, phone in hand. "He's gone," I shouted, my voice shaking with anger. "He's safe and he's not coming back here." The stranger spat on the ground. "You think you've won? You got no idea who you're messing with. That mutt was worth money." His eyes were cold, the words vile. My neighbor, hearing the altercation, popped out, barking at him to leave. The man glared but eventually slunk off, muttering threats. I called the police once again, pressing charges for harassment. This time, with my neighbor as a witness and the previous reports filed, the police finally took action. Within a few days, they picked him up on suspicion of running a dog-fighting racket. It turned out he was connected to a string of cruelty cases, I providing every bit of evidence I had. The nights of fear, the threatening note, the damage to my door, they used it all. Though the legal system can be slow, there was a sense of justice in motion. It couldn't undo the suffering he'd inflicted on countless dogs, but at least he wouldn't be roaming the streets, looking for easy targets. Months passed like a whirlwind. Rusty thrived back at his true home, his anxiety easing with her beloved companion by her side once more, true to their word, and invited me over some weekends. The first time I visited, I was unbelievably nervous. Would Rusty even remember me? He didn't just remember, he bounded up, tail thumping wildly against the floor, pressing his head into my arms in the same affectionate way he used to, as if to say, "My friend, thank you." Standing beside him, beamed from ear to ear. We became a strange sort of extended family through this dog who had bridged our lives. Over time, I found myself opening up more, volunteering at a local shelter, learning about rescue efforts, connecting with organizations that protect animals from abuse. I even started fostering dogs occasionally, using the lessons I learned from Rusty. Each time I see him, now healthy, strong, and so full of joy my heart feels a sweet, aching pride. Sometimes I still remember the question that started it all. What would you do if a dog followed you home? My answer ended up defining a part of me I never knew. Because when he followed me home that cold, rainy night, I had no idea the journey that lay ahead. I only knew a trembling, terrified creature needed warmth and safety, and I happened to be the person standing there with an open door. I could turned him away, called a shelter, or left him outside. But I didn't, and it changed everything. People ask if I ever regret it, opening my home and heart to a dog that wasn't really mine, risking threats from dangerous individuals, and ultimately facing the heartbreak of letting him go. The truth is, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. My life is richer, more meaningful because I chose compassion over convenience. Rusty remains a symbol of resilience and love, and though he's found his rightful place I carry his spirit with me. It reminds me that sometimes in the darkest storms, when we show kindness to those who wander our way, miracles can and do happen. I hope you'll share this story, because we often underestimate how a simple choice, like letting a dog step into your hallway, can turn into a life-altering event. It's easy to say, "Not my responsibility," or to fear the unknown. But had I closed the door that night, an innocent dog might have slipped away into a cruel, dangerous world. Instead, that dog helped me discover courage, empathy, and a deeper understanding of how we're all connected. So ask yourself, the next time fate taps on your door with a whimper or a plea, what would you do if a dog followed you home? Because, believe me, you never know how that single decision might rewrite your story in the most extraordinary, heartbreaking, and ultimately beautiful way. And if you're reading this, perhaps you're already part of that grand ripple, ready to open your heart in ways you never imagined possible. That night the memory still burns bright in my mind. The rattling wind, the sheets of rain, and those two fearful eyes glowing in the darkness. Today, I look back with gratitude. I didn't know it at the time, but I was about to embark on the greatest gift life could offer, a chance to save a friend, and in the process, discover something invaluable within myself. When you feel that tiny spark of compassion urging you forward, don't ignore it. Open the door. Watch what happens next. You just might change a life and find your own life changed forever.